is something that you want. And of course, we're in a situation, even if you want to be free from desire, that's still a want. That's why it's the realm of desire. This sense that there's a gap. There's me here, and over there is something I want, or something that I want to run away from. It's that fundamental, that basic. And then the realm that's said to be above that is without form. So there's still sensation. These are said to be the higher God realms, and I can't remember. There are like 14 of them classically Indian thought listed, but nonetheless, it's a very refined kind of existence. And above that is said to be the completely formless realm, where there's no sensation even, and there's no desire, certainly no form, no sensation, just these very, you might say, subtle mindsets of an alienated mind, a mind that thinks it's alienated. So these were expressed in these Indian teachings as the first level of this formless realm is said to be vast space. The only awareness is just of vast space. There isn't even a thought of somebody being aware of vast space. It's just pure vast space. Then the one above that is said to be vast consciousness. There's just consciousness, but there isn't anything else. And above that is said to be a state of neither emptiness, but not emptiness with a capital E, the Buddhist shunyata, but rather just there's just nothing. There's just nothing, and the mind is that's what the mind is at that point. And then above that, the highest of the formless states, the highest of all the worldly states that any of us can attain to, is the state of neither perception nor non-perception. So it's a step even more subtle than just nothing. So the Buddha experienced these last two states himself with his different teachers. And when he did that, they said, would you please be my successor, take over my students, take over the temple, all these things that I'm doing? And he said, no, I'm not satisfied, because he was looking for the cause of suffering. And so to give you an idea, this is kind of a classic idea of, someone comes to some tremendous, subtle mental state where there's no more suffering anymore, but you're like an aristocrat or something. You're just apart from it all. You've forgotten about all the sentient beings out there. They're part of the delusion, right? So I'm just getting rid of them. It's tremendous renunciation. He wasn't satisfied. And he went out then on his own and started practicing just incredible austerity. Sometimes you see the statues that were made first in Greek colonies in Afghanistan of this emaciated Buddha, ribs sticking out. He said himself that he could touch his stomach and feel his spine. He was that thin. One tremendous austerity. He's eating like 1 grain of rice a day, sitting under waterfalls in the midst of the winter, going without clothes, all these things. He said that he was trying to destroy that sense of self, thinking that because the self was experiencing suffering, if I can just destroy the self, then that'll be it. And he worked and he worked and he worked, and he almost killed himself. He attracted 5 other ascetics who were practicing with him. And then one day, and I think it's the Narayana River, you can go there today in India, he was making an offering, and he was so weak that he fell into the river and he almost drowned. He barely had the energy to get out. And at that moment, when he got out on the shore, he suddenly remembered an experience that he had, a spontaneous experience that he had at the age of 13. There was a spring like plowing festival going on in the kingdom. His father was the king. He was the prince, 13 years old. And he was watching all these men with, the oxen pulling these handheld plows, and men sweating and working, and all the effort that was going into the earth being turned over, earthworms cut in half, insects being upset, and clouds of seabirds like seagulls and other birds coming to feast on these insects and injured worms. And he was so moved by just the pervasiveness of the suffering that he wandered away from the celebration. He sat under what was said to be a rose apple tree. I don't know exactly what it was, but a rose apple tree. And he spontaneously fell into a state that's called samadhi. Sama means even in Sanskrit, and di is wisdom. So it's an unbroken, undistracted state, but naturally, not forced. His father, looking around like, where's my son? He's supposed to be here at this important festival, sent out his servants to find him. And they did find him, and it broke him out of his samadhi. So now, at this critical moment in his life, on the edge of death, having forsaken everything, having gone through the tremendous efforts that he did with these two teachers, and now these years of this extreme ascetic practice, he remembered that moment. And it clicked to him that that was the way to the enlightenment. The combination of his great motivation that had precipitated all of this and samadhi. Suddenly he knew what to do. He was there on the edge, and I mean, truly magically, a young woman from the nearby village came and offered him some sort of rice gruel, something like that. And understanding, he suddenly discovered the middle way, the way between just self-aggrandizement as a way to get happiness, which is what the Western world is built on, and self-abnegation, this tremendous asceticism that he'd been trying to kill something alive in him. He had discovered the middle way, so he knew what he had to do. This maiden showed up at that time with this food, and he accepted the food. His 5 ascetic buddies, seeing him eating food, assumed that he had forsaken the path of Dharma, the path of truth, and they left him in disgust. He then walked, he knew where he had to go. It's like almost 100 miles, I think, to Bodh Gaya. And then that tremendous tree, the descendant of which is still there, he sat under that tree and in one night came to his omniscience. So what's the effect of this? Well, look at our 4 mindfulnesses, our 4 immeasurables. This state of vast space, all you're aware of is space, became love. The mindset of just infinite consciousness became compassion. And the state of neither perception the state of just this vast kind of emptiness with a small e became like spontaneous joy. And the state of neither perception nor non-perception became equanimity. So all of these vast kind of cosmic kind of states, the highest worldly states, were expressed in terms of sentient beings. It all became compassion with a capital C. So sometimes we're confused by, the imprecision of English language. So compassion with a small c is what you're talking about here, where you feel the suffering of others. Yes. But compassion with a big C is actually wisdom. It's omniscience, but as is expressed in a dualistic realm, this realm of desire. So compassion is sometimes called upaya, meaning skillful means. But that doesn't really do it for us in English either. And so we're in this situation where the Buddha brought it all back down to earth. But the fact that this earth is infinite. All the teachings come from that insight. And actually that realization, more than just an insight. And this is so liberating. When he sat for 49 days underneath that tree and in the environs around the tree, doing different things, different mental kind of things. And it said that he spent a whole week just gazing in gratitude at the tree for having provided the shelter in the spot. And then eventually, he first thought that he would not teach because the teachings are subtle. And the kind of the fire that's burning in sentient beings is pretty strong. And people will take over almost anything for their own uses rather than this vast opening of the heart, this renunciation, this, entering into, emerging from the swamp, it's called. It's said that the great gods of India appeared to him and said, no, you have to teach because it will benefit some people. There are those who will benefit. So he did. And it gives you a sense of the strength of mind. Here it is. And so what do? You teach for 49 years. He came to a decision, and his decisions were without doubt, just going forward. It's such a tremendous example. And so what do we have? We've got 2,600 years of experience, tradition, wildly different cultures, wildly different languages. Again, and yet you can see as you study any of these kind of the wholeness of it and the sense at the core. They've done such a tremendous job, and so did the Buddha, to try to explain this in an experiential way and by example. So it's said that, actually our mind, what we're trying to realize is sometimes called the Dharmakaya. Dharma means truth, Kaya, the body of truth. What is it? Nothing you can say. The Dalai Lama says it's like space. It's just infinite. You can't say it's small. You can't say it's big. This complete unlimited vastness. But the mind is also the Sambhogakaya, the bliss body, which is the fact that there are forms, but like these visualized forms that we do of the 84,000 and all the different Buddhas. It's like a rainbow in the sky. It's completely beautiful, but you can't grab onto it at all. And the fact that it's there emphasizes the vastness of the sky, although it does have a subtle form. But finally, there's the Nirmanakaya, this flesh and blood kind of existence, said to be like the rain falling to us. We can experience the rain. But interestingly, the Buddhists call the Nirmanakaya the deceptive body of the Buddha. It's deceptive. There were people 2,600 years ago, and they met the Buddha, and what they see? They saw an old man sitting under a tree, an old man preaching. So it's all how we see things. The lens of our eyes is colored, is stained, and we see things through our own filter. This filter that's been developed really biologically for fitness. What means that I'm going to survive a little bit longer and pass on my genes? It's that kind of down to earth limited. So what's left is this tremendous tradition. First we have what's called the conventional teachings, the conventional Mahayana, the great vehicle. It can take you all the way there. And it's a path of kind of returning. It's a path of reversing. The Buddha called it in Lankavatara Sutra, he called it a turning about in the deepest seat of consciousness. And I conceptualize it sometimes. It's like we're all going north, right? We have all this idea and everybody agrees with it. The happiness is at the North Pole. We're all going that direction. But then suddenly this turning about in the deepest seat of consciousness. You still got all the habits going. You're still walking toward north, but now you realize I need to be going the other direction. And then when you actually do turn it around to some degree, you've got everyone walking against you. It can feel very lonely. But this turning about, this is the Mahayana. We're reversing this whole negative tsunami of seeking happiness, but not knowing cause and effect, getting the opposite result. Nothing wrong with seeking happiness, but we're just doing it the wrong way based on this extremely alienated self. But then the teachings extend to, what's called the Vajrayana, the Tantrayana, the Mantrayana, the path of mantra, the path of Tantra. Tantra means thread. It's woven together, what's woven into us. And here it's a path of transformation. We're doing this radical thing of transforming ourselves right here, right now. Transforming our mind, transforming our speech, and actually transforming our projected body. It's a little bit hard to believe. It's like the hardest. It takes the greatest kind of faith, so it's very rare. But for instance, we do Vajrakalaya practice here every other Tuesday night. And Vajrakalaya is the powerful, wrathful form of the Buddha of purification, Vajrasattva. And Vajrakalaya has 4 legs. Why? Why 4 legs? Why such a weird thing? It is the 4 immeasurables. Your transformation is standing on that highest wordly experience of the vastness of space, the vastness of consciousness, the sort of the nothingness, and then even neither perception nor non-perception. We're beyond that. But what comes out of that, standing on that, is this realization that in our typical way, our conventional way, of all beings having been your mother in a previous lifetime. And so there's this path that we can work on, starting right where we're at. We don't have to give up anything, really. We just start looking at our mind. And when we look in an outward way, we think about, could this really be true? What does it mean that earthworms are my mother? And then you think about what a mother is given. Jigten Sumgun, I don't know where his picture went, this tremendous practitioner that most of our traditions come from, above, thank you. Was a layperson. And he was, a very spiritually inclined person hanging out at a monastery, and all the monks were jealous of him. They were doing all sorts of stuff trying to drive him out. This is so human. This is just so human. And eventually he developed something. Traditionally, they say it was leprosy. I don't think anyone really knows what it was. And he said, well, he was meditating on his own, and his body was falling apart, and he went to a cave to die. Some of the prayers that we have this morning that you recited are from his experience there. And he had a vision of green Tara and full enlightenment, and his sickness went away. So this is very hard to believe, all of these things for us. And yet we can take steps on the path. So there's the path of reversing everything, which is all of this richness that we can relate to, the 84,000 different teachings, all the different methods, all based out of Buddha's enlightenment. And there's such common sense in these things. For instance, when you do the prayer gesture, it's really amazing. Whether you like it or not, that affects your mind. And you can do the opposite. You can do an angry fist. It works. It works. So we do these things, can seem to be artificial, but you're making habit. You're training the mind, like training a plant to grow the right way. There's this constant directionality, this constant pressure, just this gentle bending, whatever. So you've heard me tell the story of an American who was kind of a lot of book knowledge about Buddhism, went to Japan right after World War II in the early 1950s, and was at a monastery sitting with the teacher as a revered guest, and watching all these young monks and this little ritual they do at the end of the day. If I remember the verse, it's all beings without number I vow to liberate, endless blind passions I vow to uproot, Dharma gates without limit. I can't remember, but at any rate, the last verse is a classic Chinese prayer the Japanese recite. The last one is, all beings without number I vow to liberate. And this book smart Westerner said to the Japanese teacher, all beings without number I vow to. Do they really believe that? And the teacher said, not in the beginning. And that's it. We can train our mind. You can have a moment when suddenly your thinking mind is dropped, and the naked reality of your own mind is there. And if you have to conceptualize it, you can't conceptualize it. But if you had to describe it, it's completely compassionate and wise, real wisdom, real compassion. And so the wonder is that it works. It truly works. And we have 2,600 years of experience. So there's this path of reversing everything, very safe, very gradual. There's the path of transformation, which takes greater faith and cannot work unless one is grounded in the limitless love and compassion, at least believing in that love and compassion. And then finally, there's a path of direct recognition. We call this Mahamudra, Dzogchen, Madhyamaka, different terms, different traditions, different kind of flavors in the way it's presented. But it's direct recognition. And this is expressed in our little book. I mean, our little book here is, like Garvin Rinpoche says, the entire Buddhist path can be found in these 37 practices. This is written from the reversing point of view, the sutric point of view, the point of view that we're all born into as human beings, this dualistic, I'm here, you're there, all of that. We start to erode that wall between us and others, which is really just a conceptual wall. We start to erode that by practicing love and compassion. But nonetheless, if I can find the verse, even this direct recognition is taught in here. So if I can find it. But I'm not finding it. It's okay. So we're just extremely fortunate. This, if you're anything like me, stumbling onto all of this was completely overwhelming because, good grief, there's just so many methods, so many paths, so many. And plus we have our own things to work on. Some things you can accept readily, some things you can't, not to make a problem of it. You keep that questioning mind. That's the key thing. My strength is strengthened because the Buddha hesitated to teach. And it's like that. And if you have the fortunate circumstance, in a sense, it's all happening here already. I mean, Garvin Rinpoche's mind is completely flowing through this place, whether we know it or not. And seemingly random kind of events are actually helping you on your path. It's said when the student is ready, the teacher appears. How remarkable that someone like that has appeared here in Rochester and through this center. You start to have a little bit more faith when you see these wonderful things happening through no manipulation of yourself. You start to have belief in the spontaneity and the fundamental goodness, if you had to put a word on it, of our true nature. And we all feel that, even the sense, the way that we suffer, the way that we feel our own suffering. In relation to what? In relation to our own inherent goodness. Suffering is so painful because there's this sense that it shouldn't be. It should be something else. It's not just the reaction to the pain or whatever, but the fact that it just seems wrong. And you have that kind of spark. This little spark, by abiding in that spark, which is what the teachings allow us to do. By abiding your mind, training your mind into awareness of that little spark, it becomes brighter and brighter and brighter, seemingly. It's like right now, we meditate. It's like you have some light. It's like a sunbeam coming into a room. Yes, it's illuminating the room, yes, but also suddenly for the first time with the increased illumination, we see all sorts of dust motes jumping around there. Like Khenpo says, one snap of the finger, that's 360 mind moments that we don't see. Basically because we're distracted into the stuff that we project out of our sense trying to protect ourselves or aggrandize ourselves. And we don't reject all of that because we can't. You can't. Dharma is not like taking out the garbage. You can't do it. We have taken birth through the power of our mind. And all the kind of habits that we have, good, bad, and ugly, they've taken flesh. So we have to work with what we've got. But there's a great relaxation in that too, that you don't have to be beating yourself up so much. It's like, we're all kind of trained in that way. It's like when you're a kid and you reach for the cookie jar and your mom slaps your hand. We sometimes get into strange philosophies of, oh, this hurts so good. This hurts so much. It must be good. You can like cookies. It's all right. But we're aware of what we're doing and we change the motivation. So, nonetheless, the four immeasurables, the profundity of these teachings, and the complete practicality, highest wisdom states, the highest worldly states. And the Buddha kind of turned it upside down. Instead of these incredibly subtle worldly states that remove you from suffering, and especially from the suffering of others. Because the other thing is that these states are not permanent. You can be in the highest state and you can sit there for an eon or something, but you can fall out of it. So he was looking for the total end to suffering. And, I believe that's what he found. And then transmitted those teachings. And here we are. So there's a lot there. But if there's anyone who doesn't have one of these books, of course, please take it with you. It's White Lotus's gift to you. Again, Gaura Rinpoche has said that the entire Buddhist path can be found in this little book. And it's a very wonderful thing just to read through it once a day or just to concentrate on one verse a day. But at any rate, as things happen in your life too, it's a reference point. You can look back and say, oh my goodness, when someone wants to cut off your head, how do you respond to that? We respond in our habitual ways, but now we've got something that we can look at and develop our own patience, and at the same time, our own meditation, the calming of the mind. And then with that calm mind, looking into, both from the study, but the practice, looking into the nature of the mind, this kind of faith that it's in the nature of the mind where the answer lies, you might say. And that's what the Buddha found. Okay. Well, 18, let me see, Keen. Yeah. Yeah, these are all, this is not exactly, but right. They all have the same essence. You're exactly right. It depends how sort of deep one goes into it. But this is expressing it like 21 sensual pleasures like salt water. The more you indulge, the more thirst increases. Abandon at once those things which breed clinging attachment. Yeah, that abandonment. But I was speaking somewhere in here, I'll find it, of the direct recognition. So you're not even abandoning. Again, if I can, just that brief example of the three paths. One is just abandoning negative things. We're walking through a poisonous forest, poisonous trees, and they have poisonous. And what do? We're cutting down the tree. We don't want any more of that poisonous fruit at all. So we're just going to cut the thing down. This is the sharpness of our axe. The weight of our axe is our mindfulness practice, our shamatha practice. The sharpness of the axe is the vipassana. We're seeing things correctly. We're just chopping down because these things cause trouble. But the next level, the Mahayana, you're walking through that same poisonous forest, but now you're taking, like homeopathy, you take a little bit of that poisonous fruit because it's a remedy. It's a remedy. And the idea would be, for instance, we get to recognize, we know the poisonous fruit is hatred, for instance. We go to recognize in our life, and instead of just running away from it, abandoning it, we practice its antidote, which is patience. So that's the homeopathy. You have to be aware of the anger. But then finally, the Vajrayana and Dzogchen level, we're walking through the same poisonous. We take that poisonous fruit and take a big bite out of it as we see its nature. That's very profound. 30. Yeah, I think. Let's try. Yeah, we're playing. Thank you, Samana. 30. Yeah, since the five perfections without wisdom cannot bring perfect enlightenment, along with skillful means, cultivate the wisdom which does not conceive the three spheres as real. Practice the bodhisattva, right? Exactly right. It's completely direct, not relying, not attaching to skillful means, but rather. Well, it's said that women naturally are more conducive to Vajrayana practice because it gets into the sutric view, wisdom and compassion, right? Compassion is the right and male, of left and female is wisdom. So yeah, so it doesn't mean the men can't come to enlightenment through the don't despair. But that's very interesting, isn't it? Okay, George, you had something.
Yeah, an academic question. So just speaking that everything stems from what was formerly known as the Hinayana or the Theravada, and the Pali, the ancient Pali, and the direct kind of ascendancy of the four immeasurables in Tibetan Buddhism is from I forget the Pali title, but it would be metta, mudita, upaya, karuna, right? And there's a I mean, it stems from that, so there's a similarity. I find that sometimes that there's not in the four measurables something Kempo was trying to teach maybe a couple of weeks ago when he was saying that we develop enthusiasm and encouragement for people who are doing good deeds or good things.
Right.
And whereas, you know, when my closest friend wins the competition and I don't, that I develop the kind of
how spontaneous is your joy?
Right. But that's just it. I
Shows you.
developed the kind of joy
Right.
that is happiest for my friend.
Right.
And that, in a way, for me, seems to be an incredibly difficult thing for most of us to do.
Absolutely.
But it's not of the four measurables, it's not the one that seems to have a direct corollary from the earlier Pali Canon. I was just wondering if you would talk about that for a second.
Yeah, I don't know. What I love about the Pali suttas, sutra, Pali is a language. So Sanskrit is kind of like Latin was for Europe, you know, this liturgical language. But the spoken form of Pali, or the many different, in modern day Hindi, comes from Sanskrit. But Pali is the Prakrit, they called it, the spoken language. And so these oldest sutras that we have are very, very helpful because you can relate to them so perfectly. The Mahayana sutras are like suddenly there's I'm on the top of this mountain and there's a 10,000 Buddhas who are here with me. You know, it's like your mind is blown immediately. But in the Pali Sutras, it's like the Buddha walked into this village on such and such day, and there was this woman here who came up to him with a dead child. And you see these interactions on a very human level. So they're really, really, wonderful in that way. Now I've lost my chain of thought. You did it to me. Spontaneous joy. Gar Rinpoche said that the practice of rejoicing for others, that is the fastest way to enlightenment. And so we see in our daily life, just knowing that is so helpful because you just see, we don't do that. There's immediate like jealousy. I mean, we can if we have great attachment to someone, but as we know this and then we practice and we're seeing our faults all the time. And that's good because then suddenly you can have a moment with spontaneous joy. And that happens, you know, it can be like a cat running after a yarn ball and you're just feeling spontaneous joy for no damn good reason. It's your nature. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. Academically, I don't know the relation between them in that way, but certainly experientially. Yeah. Okay. And don't listen to Kempo too much. I'm saying that right. I can tell him that myself. I have. Well, it's just that someone I think it's the Dalai Lama. I can't remember. It may have been Lama Tarchin. I can't remember. I get this confused in my old mind. But when they first came to America, either it was Lama Tarchin or Dalai Lama. I can't remember. Someone from this. We knew we had a very good friend named Tony Leitner who was the first person to sponsor the Dalai Lama coming way before the Nobel Peace Prize in Los Angeles. He's a wonderful man. But nonetheless, someone asked, new to America, right? Can you tell me about depression? What do you think about depression? And he had to think about it because he didn't know what they were talking about. My point isn't that Tibetans don't experience all the emotions that we all do too, but we are very much so educated and we're in such a conceptual world that we get very complicated very fast. And there are a lot of cultural difficulties. Garampache to me is such a genius because he doesn't speak English. You've had some teachers like Dzongtsar Khyentse and Chogyam Trungpa who completely understand the Western mind. By learning it, they're university educated and the traditional Tibetans, and yet their communication is really very wonderful in that way. Garampache didn't do that, and yet I've never seen him with some sort of cultural funniness between questions, because lots of times the questions that the Tibetan lamas will get are coming from our own American experience, which of course is different from theirs on a worldly level. And so sometimes they sort of miss on where you're really coming from with a question. And I think maybe I'm kind of like you. I shouldn't say this about you, but myself, I'm the type of person that before he orders off the menu has to read the whole damn thing, ask questions, do all sorts of stuff. So I got this whole kind of academic thing going on, which, but the result is, and it's strengthening your faith. For me, that was necessary to do to strengthen faith. So it's a good thing. So whatever works for you is fine. But for the Tibetans, they're raised, the ordinary Tibetan doesn't really know much Dharma at all, but they know in their mind their George Washington was a monk. Their Albert Einstein was a monk. Their Magna Carta was a bunch of monks getting together and doing something good. So they have this, it's like us with science. I don't know anything about science, but I do have kind of faith that it's valid in its realm, that it's valid. So we all have like that. The Tibetans have that with Dharma, but we don't. We have so many places where we're trying to figure it out and all of that. And all that's good. And all that's good. But yeah, it just the interactions become very funny. Now, we've been fortunate because my daughter Megan is married to a Tibetan. So I get a full-time knowledge of many stories and experiences of the misunderstandings that go on, completely innocent, positive misunderstandings. Yeah. Yeah, there's that too. There you go. Okay, it's just I'm gonna. Yes, exactly right. Yeah, they're all vast, but one is love, and love is defined. That's the other thing of the Tibetans. We have words. I love my cat. I love my wife. They're not the same. Just to clarify. Meow. So love is kind of sloppy. But for the Tibetans and in India, love means wanting others to be happy. It's that simple. Yeah. It's not like I think I'll hang out with you. And compassion means further, you want people to be removed from suffering, the causes of suffering to be removed from them. So then when you get into joy, it obviously you've gone past those two. So you see the vastness of it right there. So it's not just, hey, the Bills won. No, that's the complete limitlessness of the nature of the love, the compassion, and the spontaneous joy. It's totally without judgment. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a short break and then we'll have our exciting annual meeting. Everyone's welcome to stay, by the way. Just can't vote. All right, right. Okay, let's take a break. We'll ring a bell. Yeah, right.